Heard you missed us. We're back. Greg, did you bring your pencil?
Give me something to write on, man.
Welcome back for Season 3 of You're All Doomed, where we'll slice and dice our way through Friday the 13th, Part 3, 13 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Brian.
I'm Bunny Rabbit Snuggler Greg.
This minute begins with the famous Paramount logo and ends with a mustachioed man walking into a tool shed.
I like that not only do we get the Paramount logo, but we immediately get a title credit that just says Paramount Pictures Presents, which sort of leads me to believe that maybe Paramount was starting to sit up and take a little bit more notice of this franchise and maybe not elevating it to prestige status, but not shying away from the fact that they're involved in these anymore like they had been the first couple of times.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit more of an event for them.
Yeah, they're embracing it a little bit more. That's immediately... Oh, go ahead.
No, I also noticed that it mentions Jason Inc.,
yeah,
which is the first time I've noticed that.
Yeah, and I want that on my business card. Screw the pumpkin payroll services thing on my business card from last season. I want Jason Inc. on my business card.
It's a great... what is it? It's Jason Inc. / Frank Mancuso Jr. production.
Yeah.
But I do like the Jason Inc. aspect of it.
Then the next 5.5 minutes are kind of slow and a little repetitive because it's basically just... the climactic confrontation from part 2 all over again. So,
once again, we've got another, flashback, and I just don't know at what point do they say, okay, look, we're not bringing in new fans at this point. We just have.
Yeah, why spend so much time recapping what,
Yeah, there is something a little bit different about this, and I don't know, maybe I just don't remember seeing it from part 2, but there was an image or footage of Jason rising up from the floor after being struck down by Ginny, which I definitely don't think we saw in part 2, because she hit him, they looked at the mask, or they pulled off his mask, and then they left. But this flashback shows Jason rising up after getting struck down.
Well, kind of like crawling away on the floor. But what's interesting is that it doesn't make any sense with the continuity, because Jason was... Ginny had embedded the machete in his shoulder in the cabin, or in his shack at the end of part 2. Then when he jumps through the window a few minutes later, the machete is still embedded in his shoulder.
Oh, that's right.
And yet this insert shot of him on the floor, which is clearly, filmed from this movie, it was not leftover footage or anything like that. The machete is not in his shoulder anymore, and he kind of slinks away. So it's almost like, did he slink back to the camp, put the machete back in his shoulder to jump through the window, or it doesn't really line up with the events that we saw at the end of part 2.
And there's no real point to showing it because we know he gets back up.
Right.
All you had to do in the flashback is just show Jason crashing through the window and grabbing Ginny, and we would know that he got up.
The only problem with that is that they couldn't show the face at the end of part 2 because he looks so drastically different in this movie. The makeup is entirely different.
No, you nailed it. That's exactly why they filmed that scene then. Because they wanted to show that Jason lived. If you're going to show a flashback and then you show Jason being struck down, you have to show that he lived for the purpose of continuing on with this movie. But if you can't show him coming through the window, then how do you do it? Well, you film a scene with him. Oh, okay.
There you go.
But yeah, the continuity thing is right. Why wouldn't he still have the machete in his neck? So they forgot that aspect of it. But that's a cool little realization that I never really thought of. But yeah, one thing you'll start to see. One thing that is consistent in these movies is the inconsistency in Jason's appearance from one movie to the next. Even when it takes place, the next day, they look completely different. So, nice observation, Greg.
That insert shot is immediately followed by the first 3D effect of this film, which is the title sequence. Has kind of this Superman the movie-esque swoosh toward, the credits swoosh toward the screen.
We should probably point out that this movie is in 3D.
As originally presented theatrically, yes, it's in 3D, or on the crappy DVD that I bought that has the 3D version as a bonus feature, and really doesn't work so great in modern technology, but was kind of fun.
With your cereal box 3D glasses.
Exactly, but it was fun to give it a try. I got a kick out of the haze of smoke that's in the background of these red credits that pop off the screen. It looks sort of like Kevin Smith's living room or something. It's just this constant haze of...
Yeah, the 3D lettering is radical. It's just it just bursts out of the screen.
It's a big departure from the logo of the first two movies. It's funnier. I get a kick out of it.
Yeah, I mean it's very reminiscent of the Superman titles, which were not in 3D, but just this very kind of flying at the screen and kind of like mystical, and it really doesn't fit in with the tone of the movie. It's a little too magical. Yeah,
it's a strange thing, but fortunately that's backed up by the greatest theme song in the history of cinema.
It's just bone chilling how scary it is. I mean, the thought that went into this song to make it as scary as possible. Well, let's just be honest. It had nothing to do with the creation of this song, because it's a disco version of. It's not even really the Friday the 13th theme. There might be some echoes of it in there somewhere, but it's very much just like a disco.
It's a disco horror movie theme with the thrown in at parts.
With a great beat that you can dance to.
Yeah, I mean, I picture, Jason at Studio 54, in his white leisure suit bopping to the disco beat.
It's very jarring, too, because you get the flashback from part 2, which we've mentioned is a movie that we love, and it's really creepy. And then you get these 3D titles, which automatically look weird. And then the music just throws everything off. And then you're just like, what are we about to watch here? Like, is this a joke, or is this really supposed to be like, are we still supposed to be in a scary kind of atmosphere? Because you've killed it, if that's what your intention is.
Yeah, this might be the point where the series begins to become more about audience participation and not actually scaring anyone, but just kind of going on a roller coaster ride.
And this is why Paramount was finally like, yes, this is the movie we want to put our stamp of approval on. We are finally getting the movie we always wanted.
Maybe they didn't see it before they put their...
That's also possible. So after the tubular credits, we open up on a general store / house / cabin. It's not entirely clear what we're looking at. There's a hand-painted sign above the door that says Crystal Lake, so all right, we know where we are. There's also a storm approaching, and I don't know if you ever remember what Kevin Bacon said about storms, but I'm betting it's going to tear down the valley like a son of a gun. We also see a bunch of sheets drying on clotheslines.
A shit ton of sheets.
It's a lot of laundry.
I mean, I kind of thought at first that this might be some sort of roadside motel / general store / campground, but dialogue later in this chunk and the next indicates that it's really not. It's just their laundry.
Yeah, we'll see more of it as this scene goes on, but I nothing was clarified for me by the end of the scene of what this place is. It really is kind of this hybrid store, residence, possible motel. We're not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like they knew they needed some stuff for the clothesline. Nobody on the crew wanted their clothes in the movie, so they just tore all the sheets off the hotel beds that they were using while they were shooting this movie and hung them up on the clothesline for the day or something.
And out of nowhere, this man pushes his way through the drying sheets, and it's Gabe Kaplan from Welcome Back, Kotter, right?
It sure looks like it.
Okay. It may not be, but that's who I think it is. And he accidentally knocks over one of the poles that are holding up the clothesline. And this is Harold Hockett.
And it's our first 3D effect, because as he lifts the pole, the back end of it points toward the camera, and it's supposed to jump out at the screen like it's coming right at you.
So less than half a second after Harold knocks over the pole, his hair curler wearing wife is barking at them at the window, and we find out that this is Edna Hockett. And she's not a charming woman. She just starts screaming at the top of her lungs. She's like, God damn it, Harold, I spent all day washing your clothes. Look at what you're doing to them. You know I work very hard around here trying to keep up from all of your sloppy habits, and I get no help from you at all.
She seems deeply unhappy.
That was a mouthful.
She seems deeply unhappy.
Yeah, and so she's just starts screaming at him like crazy. You know, I've known this woman for less than 10 seconds, and I'm already thinking, Jason, where are you? She's just deeply unlikable, and I already feel sorry for Harold.
Once Harold manages to get the clothesline back in order, we cut back to the inside of the house where we see Edna is watching a local news report with a little cameo from director Steve Miner, who is the local news anchor, talking about events from the previous day.
And that the newscast is one of the most detailed news reports I've ever seen for a local newscast, but it goes a little something like this. The quiet little community of Crystal Lake was shocked today with reports of a grisly mass murder scene. 8 corpses have been discovered in what is already being called the most brutal and heinous crime in local history. A police spokesman told Ion News that we've been combing the area since just before dawn and are afraid that their gruesome discovery is just beginning. Police Chief Scott Fitzsimmons had no comment about the murders when reached early this morning. Detectives at the scene, however, were baffled by the brutality of the killings. Bodies were found literally strewn over the 4-square-mile campground. What? Is this campground seriously 4 miles?
Well, I mean, if you count the distance to Jason's shack, which is, camps are probably pretty sprawling because you've got, lakefront, you've got, woods that you have to hike through to the archery range and the boathouse, and I could kind of see it. Okay.
I never really got the impression that the camp was that big, but you've convinced me somewhat. Back to the newscast. Ginny Field miraculously survived repeated attacks by the axe-wielding killer. Jason never had an axe in part 2.
Yeah. He had a pitchfork a lot.
Yep. And he had a butcher knife, and he had a spear and a machete, but he never had an axe. So I'm going to call fake news. She was in serious condition, suffering from multiple stab wounds and severe hysterical shock.
Well, we only saw one stab wound. She got slashed in the leg with a pickaxe, unless something else happened to her after Jason pulled her through the window.
Which is possible because she's on the gurney and she's covered in a blanket, so there might be other wounds there. But you're right. We only saw one. The names of the 8 victims are being withheld until notification of next of kin. One thing I noticed, this is the completion of the newscast, one thing I thought was very interesting is as they're explaining everything that happened, they're showing footage of Ginny being wheeled into the ambulance, and it's the same exact footage that we saw in part 2. And that's why I asked you last season if you remembered seeing any newscasters or cameramen while she was being, wheeled away, because, we get this questionable, footage that really shouldn't exist. And
unless in those moments in part 2 we were seeing through the eye of the news camera,
which is possible.
But yeah, no, they just didn't think that far ahead.
There's also another quick 3D scene here where, during the newscast, the reception starts to go out and Edna has to adjust the TV antenna and it goes directly into the camera. And I'm sure that was just a shocking moment for the viewing audience.
So the fact that they mention 8 bodies, does that prove that Paul didn't die?
I think it does, because I heard that too, and I went back and did a tally. And so we had Crazy Ralph, Deputy Winslow, Scott, Terry, Mark, Jeff, Sandra, and Vicky. That's 8. And obviously Paul would have been 9. If they never found a body, then they're not counting him.
Well, and then in fact they're forgetting, Alice's corpse is also there. She wasn't killed in that movie, but her body was in the shed or in the shack with everyone else's too. So,
well, yeah, I think, but you're right. That's fair. But she was presumed dead because even Paul knew that when he was telling the campfire story. that, there was pools of blood at her house or whatever, but that her body was never found. So she's presumed dead, and they found her body. But you're right. They, in theory, should count that.
Yeah, I feel like this newscaster isn't necessarily reading accurate details of this crime scene.
I agree.
This news report does manage to spook Edna quite a bit, as the news media likes to do. There's a little bit of fear-mongering going on, so she immediately starts getting jumpy. And we actually we catch a glimpse of someone moving through the sheets out on the clothesline. We, of course, know it's Jason.
Yeah, it probably is Jason. He does look different than where we left off in part 2. He's clearly bald. He doesn't have the side, mullet. He looks a little bit different, but there's no doubt that it's Jason Voorhees.
Yeah, he's much taller looking than Jason was in the previous film. He is wearing the right clothes. He does have a plaid shirt and overalls on, though, so I think we can pretty much deduce that it's Jason.
Do we know when this takes place?
The news report doesn't specifically mention that, but you figure it's got to be either the next day or shortly thereafter, because how long would it have taken if Ginny was still alive when the news crew was there? That had to be the next day. So you figure they had the news story prepped for that evening's newscast or maybe the following day's newscast. It wouldn't be something that they would be reporting on several weeks later or anything. So it's got to be within the first 48 hours after part 2.
Edna hears something, and she goes outside to investigate, and there was a little brief moment that I don't think I'd ever noticed before, but there was it's like a brief shot of someone's arm or hand in the shadows, just kind of like off to the side as Edna's working her way through the clothesline, or through the drying laundry. And it was just really creepy. It's very subtle, and if you're not looking for it, you're probably not going to see it, but it's just this like shadow of an arm off to the side of the screen.
Yeah, nice. Also behind Edna, we get our first indication that there's some sort of train motif going on with this establishment. There's a "Look out for the locomotive" sign behind her, which, I'm not sure if that's like a little kiddie ride or if there's a model locomotive that you can climb on and, like a playground, or if it's just a sign from an old train station or what.
Or it's Harold's catchphrase when he's in bed with Edna.
Or on the toilet, as we'll see.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I don't recall, if we truly are at Crystal Lake, like the sign says, then I don't recall there ever being any train or train tracks. And so to kind of draw attention to this sign that says "Look out for the locomotive," it had me wondering too, like, oh, maybe there's going to be a really cool train sequence in this movie. We'll find out, but it's it's a weird sign.
And that motif is carried through on the inside of the store where Harold is working. There's a fishbowl on the front counter that has a little caboose, a little toy caboose at the floating, or not floating, but sunk at the bottom of it. There's a poster for the Great Train Robbery that's below the counter on the front. So perhaps this building was an old train station or something, and was converted for. I
could see that. It does kind of look like an old school train station.
One of the fish in the bowl is named Lionel, so obviously Harold is a train fan.
As Edna's outside, she's kind of spooked, and she whatever noise she hears, she thinks it's Harold, and she kind of calls out, and we see someone walk by kind of through the drying clothes, and it's a pretty good look, even though it's dark out. One thing to point out about this movie is that because it was shot in 3D, the technology back then required all of the nighttime scenes to be really well lit, and so even when you're outside at night, it's kind of comically bright out. There's just lighting from every direction. There's not a lot of shadows on people's faces. It's just a lot of direct lighting, so it takes away from the spooky atmosphere a little bit, but it also allows you to see a little bit more than you would normally see. We also see Harold, for some reason, deciding that he's going to take a swig of the fish food, and he likes the taste of it so much that he actually goes back for a second helping, which I don't think I've ever been curious enough to try the fish food, and let alone enjoy it enough to go back for more. I mean, he's in a store where there's plenty of food around. So.
Well, clearly. I mean, this establishes two things about Harold as a character. One, that he's snacky, and two, that he has no interest in sanitation whatsoever. We presume that he's a grocer because there's all sorts of produce and stuff in this establishment, but he has a rabbit that is a free-roaming rabbit, apparently, that's already eating some of the produce. So he goes over to stop that and begins going through the store carrying this animal on his shoulder, periodically stopping at food items and consuming them from his own stock, which is probably for me the most horrifying part of this movie.
Yeah, and it's not like just one thing. Like he grabs a jar of peanuts off the shelf and eats them, and then puts it back on the shelf, and then
takes a swig of Sunny Delight and puts
like
it back
room
on
temperature Sunny D, which is even grosser. He opens a box of like those waxy chocolate donuts and eats some of them.
Donetti's.
Donetti's, and then Edna shows up, thank God, and scolds him for just being such a disgusting pig.
Yeah, we get another, a hallmark of this series so far is pointless jump scares, and we get one here where, her hand grabs Harold's shoulder, and we're supposed to be horrified by this, and horrified no more than Harold, who now is being confronted by his angry wife for his snacking habits despite his doctor's orders, and his response is to, after she leaves, defiantly bite the donut, kind of at her in kind of a fuck you motion.
While he's doing all this, we also see the shadow of someone walk past the window of the store. So whoever was out, lurking in the drying laundry is also, outside the window, and Harold doesn't notice it. Yeah. Yeah. So Edna gets fed up with, Harold and his filthy rabbit. And so she tells him to go put it back where it belongs. So that's when Harold heads into the barn or the tool shed or something, which apparently is where he's going to keep the rabbit. We don't know yet because the scene ends here. But, so we get a nice little recap of what happened in part 2, even though the newscast was highly inaccurate. And we learn that Harold and Edna are a lovely couple, and
very tender relationship between these two.
Yeah, and they have some weird enterprise in this general store / train station / cabin / house, whatever.
I mean, I kind of like the fact that we're seeing some of the actual townspeople now. So far, most of the characters that we've encountered have, come from other parts of the country to work at these camps. We haven't gotten too much exposure to the locals. Some from the diner in part 1, the police officers, Crazy Ralph, a few interactions here and there, but now we're getting some local flavor, and they're populating Crystal Lake with actual inhabitants. So I'm kind of happy about that.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. They're maybe not the most charming characters, but you're right. At least we're seeing some of the local flavor of
day-to-day life in Crystal Lake. But overall, I'd call this a slow start to the movie. It's there's no deaths to report other than the newscast roundup of part 2. We've
already gotten a few 3D scenes. However effective they are, I don't know. But they're kicking the 3D into high gear. They're not going to wait until later to introduce that effect.
Yeah, they're doling it out from the get-go. So that's fun.
Well, until next episode, I've been Brian.
I've been Greg.
And you are all doomed.